people that want to be angry with you and make change.
Well, the
That's
internet's
the problem. You gotta stop letting it dissolve. You can't let the anger dissolve. You know, for you, it never does. We're still. It's just crazy. It's crazy.
I didn't think like since NIU like there's so many
Yes, it was. And what's so horrible, the things that they were saying after Sandy Hook, well, if no change will be made after children are slaughtered, then no change will be made, but those poor babies could not speak for themselves. These kids can speak, and they're going to
that's
speak.
different. Columbine
No, I did not.
Totally. So as much as people talk about social media and how it's a bad thing, it reaches the masses and allows them to experience and
in 2005, I had attacked the table. Thank God there was no 2 minutes before.
I didn't say a word to anybody. I'm so scared of always being in trouble. I mean, my number one fan, Dan Nagel, that one. No, I don't think Dan's going to be here. You know what, though, Ben? I'm so disappointed in the lack of response from everybody in our school when you sent that blast. Because it's really good. You know how someone reached out to me? One, Brooks later.
But don't take it as a dig because that's the response you get.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure when you try to get people to come to events or do anything. I know. I get it. And you know, the new generation of young teachers is different than we were. Okay, for example.
Nice to meet you face to face.
Right?
Well, yeah, we've been on tab. I get emails about emails. It's like, Anne's going to take
You and I were coaching
around
around the park and kids. And you still are.
A few times in staff meeting, you're like, well, Anne's going to get off in front. And it's like, that
other end.
Yeah.
I think
Are they still coming the same way? I think people are still coming in. I think there's some people buying T-shirts and things like that. So,
I also think our district is so
I'll check with Jen.
pressure cooker.
That is true. It's just hanging out.
Just hanging out.
My niece is a big girl. It's booked something a long time ago.
I know, it was funny back then.
They go from college to play sports. They both to teachers.
I'm glad that the district's all in now.
All right, I'm around.
To get 6, 7, 8
Did she say when? Like, I'd be surprised if they didn't send a spy to make sure we don't hear the words.
Well, that's why I was wondering.
You sing a song to come in. Can you stand at the back?
It's good.
Yeah. See, that's
Ours would
at
because
least
it's
you're
perception.
removed.
I was going to say, and I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
The mirror. Everybody's single.
Sure. Sure. Very different area, for sure. For sure. But I'd be willing to bet there. That's what I was going to say. I'd be willing to bet that it is a bigger problem there.
Benjamin, would you like to?
Yeah, they're watching.
Wine always has to be wine.
How are you? Good.
And morning service, so there you go. We have wine and all our shit.
This is not the best tasting wine.
No, but we could
Switch it up as you have a guest in the house.
we have champagne.
Oh, honey, you'll be just fine. Hey, you were fantastic when we spoke at the union. You were fantastic.
Defer to you.
It's not my spot.
I was standing
You're
there
right in the middle, too. Walk out yesterday.
He did not. He had 28 kids in the room. 20 of them left, 8 stayed. And so he said at the beginning of the period, it was like 20 minutes to 10. He said, okay, I'm not making judgment whatsoever. I just want to know who's going so I know how to run the period. So watch them raise their hand. Okay, let's go. You know, to like speed through the lesson. And the kids left. Maybe finished.
Very lively.
It would probably be very good for my soul.
And then we have really services, our favorite service. And then we have a Saturday morning service, which is in the other room, the smaller room, and also has a lot of instruments, and also has goes in and out of the room really quiet and so quiet.
We're talking about which services what they like.
And you would do in that service you would do a little maybe 5 minutes of something and then an hour something after the service. 45 minutes after the service. If you were here on BMA here, you would do probably 15 to 20 minutes. Saturday morning is easier to schedule. It's like we can do because not that it's we it's not on schedule any of it. Yeah. We can do anything we want to.
We really
Turns out.
It just depends, like.
Depends on what you want to experience. Hi, how are you? It's nice to see you. It's going well. Do you know Reverend Anjali?
Anjali. I'm the rector at St. Gregory's. Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Running for office. And do you know Benjamin, our senior youth group president?
The address is Melrose.
And you know Jason?
Seen in the press using this photo.
The front page of Time. Yeah.
It was.
Cover of Time.
How long has it been?
2 years.
And where did you, is that where you grew up as well?
I grew up in South Carolina. South Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas.
See you later. Thanks for being here. It means a lot. Sweetest human being in the world.
And his wife is. She was thinking the universe, yeah. Scott drew us.
We knew we'd be a few minutes late, but still.
What's the process like? The process for like getting in Texas. I went back.
You're called
I
by
didn't
God to show up.
Yeah, they just they have a need and there's actually a national database. Like
Oh, yeah,
they
okay.
have a national database. Those of us who are willing to look for something can look on that or they reach out to you directly.
When I did CP, I had some friends. We were talking a lot of conversation about certain fascinating.
Where did you do your CP?
At
She just totally isn't over there.
There was. We would carry the tour around afterwards, and it was during the NHL breaks. I was watching the game, watching the playoff. That's what we were walking around. It's like,
Am I going to win? Yeah. My self is really going to enjoy that.
great. Because then we can pretend that we're
sitting next to
absolutely. Can I bang That's all I do when I go to conferences. It's like I text my friends on the panel to see if I can make them laugh.
Yeah, so it's a nice crowd. Okay, why don't we all stand up?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out here tonight. My name is Benjamin Blumen, and I serve as co-president along with Emma Rosenberg-Rappin of Congregation BJBE's Senior Youth Group. On behalf of the Senior Youth Group, we are proud to be a part of the larger community that values the voice of its teens and encourages us to stand up for what we believe in.
I'm Rabbi Karen Kadar, the senior rabbi of this congregation. I represent our clergy team, Cantor Jennifer Frost, Rabbi Jason Fenster, Cantor Raina Green, and the Board of Trustees, led by co-presidents Lisa Wilson, who is here, and Tracy Friend, who is out of town at the moment. Welcome to BJBE. We are proud to offer this platform, which seeks to bring together a diverse community united in the belief that the safety and security of our children and all of our citizens is first and foremost, and that we should stand together with a strong moral compass as activists in building a peaceful, accepting, and loving community.
Hi, I'm Ann Jolly. I'm the rector of St. Gregory's Episcopal Church in Deerfield, and it's our honor to co-sponsor this event with BJBE and Moms Demand Action. This is an important discussion about how we spend our lives together in community, and we believe that honoring and respecting the dignity of every human being is part of our call together as people on this earth. It's our hope that this is one of our many conversations and actions that we'll all join in together.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Leah Kirshner, and I will be your moderator this evening. I am the educator's lead for the North Shore Moms Demand Action Groups. I am also an elementary school teacher myself. I live here in Deerfield with my husband and my 2 children, and I'm honored to be here with you tonight. I wanted to start with some info about Moms Demand Action, for those of you who may not be that familiar with us yet. We are a nonpartisan grassroots organization. We do support the Second Amendment under the Everytown for Gun Safety parent organization. We work to reduce gun violence in America through working towards greater gun safety and common sense legislation. We are not just moms. We welcome moms, dads, sisters, brothers, grandmas, grandpas, friends. Anybody who wants to be a part of our organization is welcome. I do want to thank our co-hosts for this evening, Congregation BJBE, the BJBE Youth Group, and St. Gregory's Episcopal Church. I also want to take a moment and introduce our local Moms Demand Action leaders, so that in case you want to become more active in our groups, you know who to come talk to afterwards. We've got Sarah Knieznik, if you want to just stand and wave. She is our local group leader in the Mundelein, Libertyville, Vernon Hills area. Jenny Stadelman is our Deerfield Highland Park local group leader. Karen Fliegler, I'm not sure if she's in the room, there she is. She is in like the Northbrook and Glenview area. Carolyn Pinta, who's going to be on our board today, she is going to be, she's the leader of the new Buffalo Grove group. And Jan Starzek is back over there, and she is in Park Ridge. So if you're in any of those areas and want to connect with them, please do so. Obviously, you're here because you know that this topic is so important. On February 14th, there was a terrible tragedy in our country. And since then, of course, it's not been the only one. There have been multiple incidences with guns in schools, even in the last month alone. We do want to make clear that this is not a partisan event tonight. School safety is a topic on everybody's minds right now. There are a variety of perspectives we'll hear from today, different angles around school safety, from preparing and planning, to active shooter drills, to legislative measures, and also hearing about the ongoing effects of how school shootings affect the community and the students. We all know that this is an issue that we cannot let become the status quo. The question is, what can we do to ask our school boards, administration, parents, and citizens to work together towards change? So just to tell you a little bit about the format of our evening, we've got some prepared questions that we are going to start with that we think will kind of capture many of your interests on the topics. And we'll start with those. And throughout the evening, you all received a card on your way in. If there is a question that you think of that we haven't asked or that you are particularly interested in, feel free to write it down. And then at just various intervals throughout the evening, just hold your card up and somebody will come collect it. We'll probably cut off the questions at about 7:45 so that we do have some time to prepare them. We may end up combining some of them together if we've got repeats and things like that. Okay? Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me. I also wanted to take a moment before we begin and introduce Nancy Roddering, the mayor of Highland Park. We are honored to have her as our guest here this evening. Thank you for coming. Okay, so I would like to then start by introducing our esteemed panel. We're going to start with Randy Braverman. Randy has over 25 years' experience in managing security operations in a variety of roles, including security consultant, director of security and campus safety, and a law enforcement officer. He has overseen full-scale emergency crisis exercises and coordinated the efforts of local, county, and state authorities, military forces, hospitals, and school personnel within these exercises. An emergency preparedness specialist, Randy conducts vulnerability assessments using the Alpha Vulnerability Assessment methodology and provides technical assistance for emergency and crisis plans for school districts, municipalities, and corporations. Randy is also an instructor for the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board Executive Institute, Illinois School and Campus Training Program. Welcome. Next, we've got Dr. Susan Coleman. Dr. Coleman has spent over 2 decades in the field of special education and currently serves as the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services in a northwest suburb of Illinois. Susan is a published author, including her book, Just One Click, The Eternity of Cyberbullying, and The Suspension Question, Bridging the Gap Between Prevention, Intervention, and Suspension. She has been published in peer-reviewed journals and provides professional development to school districts. Dr. Coleman is a renowned speaker who presents nationally and locally at conferences, workshops, and seminars. Her areas of expertise include autism, cyberbullying, alternatives to suspension, multi-tiered systems of support, diversity in education, and behavior management. She also conducts workshops for families and communities. Thank you for joining us. Next, we've got Tracy Katz-Mull. Tracy is the president of Northbrook School District 28's school board, covering Northbrook Junior High, Meadowbrook, Greenbrier, and Westmore Elementary Schools, and the Young Explorers Early Childhood Program. She serves on the board Legislation and Innovate 28 Communities. Outside of District 28, Tracy serves as the North Shore Local Legislative Lead for Moms Demand Action, the co-chair and future committeeman for Democrats of Northfield Township, and is an active alumna of Illinois Women's Institute for Leadership. She lives in Northbrook with her husband and 2 children. Next, we've got Carolyn Pinta. Carolyn, in addition to being our Moms Demand Action leader of the Buffalo Grove chapter, she is also an educator in the north suburbs of Chicago for 18 years. She and her husband, who is also a teacher, have 1 daughter who is in middle school. Next, we've got Ben Levin. Ben has been teaching middle school health for 18 years in Lake County. Ben is also a school district union president and has served in this role for the last 3 years. Ben's goal is for everyone to be safe each and every day in school, whether it is our students, staff, or any visitors to the building. And last, we've got Patrick Corrales. Patrick lives in Chicago, Illinois, working as a GIS project manager for Walgreens in Deerfield. He has lived through a mass shooting in his classroom at Northern Illinois University on February 14th, 2008. He was shot twice himself and watched 5 of his classmates get killed. There were also an additional 21 students and professors that were injured that day. He will be sharing his story of what he went through that day and what he is doing today to help others who have gone through shootings, as well as what he is doing to help bring change to the school shooting problem that we have in America today. So, thank you. Let's give a warm welcome to all of our panelists. So, the first 2 questions are going to be for everybody on our panel. Let's start by hearing about how you personally are impacted by gun violence in schools and how you think about it today. What is your connection and interest in this topic? Who'd like to start? Go ahead, why don't we start right here?
Sure. So for 34 years, I've been a police officer and a school campus director and a consultant for a long time. And my role, I always wanted to be a police officer when I was younger and help, obviously, people. But it was nice that I moved into the school system for 25 years and helping students manage safety. In 2005, I can't tell you what school it was, but we had 50 gang shootings in town, very active school that I've been to most of the schools. It's been always active where I go to. We lost numerous kids in our schools to the gang shootings in town. But one day, thank God for a young lady who said something 2 minutes beforehand. Myself and another officer had to tackle a kid and take a gun away from the kid before he shot another student. So I've been always involved in positive roles for school safety, training, and working to make sure that the state of Illinois gets good training and make sure around the United States we get good training, making sure people are safe. And for the last 13 years, the state of Illinois, and you probably don't know that unless you're a police officer or a school person, we offer free training for a conference every year and give something back. And it's all free people nationally known to come in from the state of Illinois to help schools and police departments at a conference every year in April. So the State Valley does a lot, and I'll talk about laws that we're trying to create, and we have created laws to help the schools. But I've always been effective as a school safety person all my life.
Thanks, Randy. So I've been in education for my entire professional life, and in doing so, I've worked in a variety of different districts, both wealthy districts, districts with big socioeconomic difficulties, in communities that are mostly minority to communities that are predominantly white. And I will say that the mental health piece of what students struggle with is the same across all of those different areas. And when people think this won't happen in my town, I can tell you that it's happened in every district I've been in where there's been an incident of violence or a student who brought a weapon to school. It doesn't always make the news, because what you don't know are the people behind the scenes who deal with that on a regular basis. I have been with students who have had guns in their backpack. I have had knives pulled on me in classes. And then we deal with the aftermath of that. So working with students with special education has always been my passion, and that has really blossomed into what can we do as administrators to support the social emotional needs of our students, because kids are not born into this world being school shooters. Kids do not wake up one day and say, everything's going great in my life, and now I think I'm going to shoot up the school. There are signs, there are symptoms, there are things that we can look holistically at to determine if someone's at higher risk. So that is a passion of mine. I've worked with Randy in the past in different districts. I've been to his trainings. But I certainly feel very strongly about what we as parents, I'm a parent, I have 2 teenage boys, what we need to do on our end and how we need to be more observant and aware, and that these things that kids carry, should be no sense of privacy for our children, because what you don't know can hurt someone else. So I'm honored to be here, and I hope that I can provide some helpful information for you.
I'll piggyback off that, because as a health teacher here in the northwest suburbs, we talk about mental emotional health. We talk about depression. We talk about suicide. We talk about stress, and we know in this area regarding schools that it is high stress, high demand, high testing, and unfortunately we don't have a way for these students as a resiliency coping skills. They honestly don't know how to cope, and unfortunately this is how we see it with shootings, stabbings, hitting teachers, and as a union president, these are what my teachers are coming to me with. I'm being hit, I'm being bit in the school, the student's lashing out. How can I be safe in the school? And that's where I have to go back and talk to the administration and figure out, all right, what can we do? This should not be happening to adults, this should not be happening to other students, because I know for a fact, if something were to happen to another student, one of your child, you would file a lawsuit right away. You would sue the school district. My son, my daughter is not being protected. Well, just same thing with adults as well. We have to be protected, and I got to protect those teachers. So, thank you for having me here.
Are we jumping back around? As a school board member, my connection to this issue is one of informed oversight, as it is for any other area where the board oversees the administration, staff, and teachers. But as an individual, I expect that it's the same as it is for a lot of you. Having grown up here, most of us had some connection to one of the earliest school shootings when Lori Dan happened here in the Hubbard Woods area. Most of us remember being in some version of a soft lockdown, is what it would now be called in the schools, and kind of watching this play out over the headlines. Remember being told by parents and teachers and staff that this was an anomaly, something that would never happen again, not to worry. Now here we are decades later, and I'm teaching my children about hard and soft lockdowns and security procedures. And that's what motivates me as an individual and also as a school board member to increase our focus on what we could do to prevent these situations. And then obviously as the last case scenario, handle them when they happen.
As a teacher of 18 years, I'm sure Ben and I would have a lot of the same things to say, but it's been interesting and horrifying to see how the situation has evolved since we both started in the year 2000. When we began as young teachers, I don't remember, although Columbine, the shooting had taken place, that was such a rarity, such a strange oddity. It was not something I ever even thought of. Then we went to learning a lockdown. We learned a soft lockdown, like you just talked about. We learned a hard lockdown. I'm sure that tonight the ALICE program will be talked about. That is something that is new in the schools. And this is what, of course, motivated me to step up to join Moms Demand Action. And I have definitely learned some lessons in my short time with Moms Demand Action and things that I've seen in this country, and that is that kids are more important than guns, and that I really believe we must implement better laws to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. One thing Dr. Coleman said already that struck a chord in me is that there are signs and symptoms that are present that need to be addressed, and the way to address those is to make sure that the laws allow it. And I'm sure this is something we'll get into later, but just as a quick example, how in Parkland there were red flags, that 23 times red flags had gone up about this young man that became the shooter, yet due to the laws in Florida and the way they were written, the officers were unable to step in and do what they needed to do to prevent that tragedy. So I really do believe in the laws protecting the people, and that's what I'm here to help with in the schools.
So, mentioned earlier, I'm Patrick Corellis. I'm a survivor of the Northern Illinois University shooting that happened 10 years to the day of Parkland. I was in the worst place. I was in the classroom when the shooter came in. And I'll go more into detail on that story, but I'm just here just to share my story and just to say what I'm doing to try to prevent what happened to me, what happened to the Sandy Hook children, what happened to the people that were watching a movie in Aurora, people at a concert in Vegas, just all these shootings I've seen in the last 10 years after NIU. I just want to try to do what I can, share my story, and try to give advice to politicians or to parents that have children, to teachers, anyone that I can.
Thank you. What are some lessons learned and best practices that you have all seen implemented? Have we learned, what, if anything, have we learned in the 19 years since Columbine?
Well, I think the police response is a lot different than Columbine, because the police response was waiting and getting enough officers and going in there. Now it's called rapid deployment, which the officers go in right away. It depends on the department, but it's 2 or 3 officers possibly going in right away. So there is no wait. So the police department is doing a great job across the United States from training this, and the state of Valley does a great job in training their officers too. It's right now is we give options. Before it was always lockdown. And now it doesn't make a difference if you have Alice, run, hide, fight, or whatever you do. You got to give teachers options, because not always lockdown is going to work, because it depends where the student's at, or teacher's at, or where the shooter's at. So you have to give options and train on that. And I think the emergency plans have come a long way. And I have to say this, the state of Illinois, I teach for the state of Illinois 14 programs, and there's a lot of free trainings that we teach the schools and police departments. We train on student behavioral threat assessment, which is a team in school to look at those warning signs. When someone comes and says, hey, this created a threat, we train them on what to look for, how to have a team together, what they should be working with the police department on. And so that's all free training that the state gives to the schools at no cost to schools and police departments. And we have 14 other trainings we train on to the schools. So I think there's a lot more training that's going on that obviously, since Columbine had it. So the schools are a little bit trained better than obviously many years ago. But I think that obviously just the best practices change all the time. So it doesn't mean what that's last week might be best practices next week. So you got to be constantly knowing what's going on with the laws, with the training, and your preparedness. So it's really important that obviously everybody understands what they're trained on. And I could go on more, but I'm not.
I'm going to take this off. Okay, I agree with you. I actually remember where I was teaching when Columbine happened, and I was a teacher, and it was a big discussion whether or not, at that point, we all had TVs in the classroom, back in the day with like VCRs, and it was a big discussion that my principal had, and a decision my principal had to make. Do we, show this, or do we let school go on as normal and then pretend that nothing happened and let the kids go home and talk to their parents? And so I think a lot has been done in terms of open conversations with students and parents. Personally, one of the downfalls of No Child Left Behind was that it completely left out the social-emotional learning component. And so as schools and administrators and school boards were forced to focus on academics, we completely lost sight of the social-emotional component of students and adolescents, and how that brain development is important to the decision-making process of kids. We've come full circle. I'm not sure where ESSA will fall into that, so that's our new education laws were mandated to us. So I do think that we have now taken better steps to identify the needs of our kids. Where we still struggle is where school services and mental health services begin. And I think there is a gap in what is expected and the training that our social workers, our psychologists, our counselors have, and now what the expectation is for them and the support they're supposed to be given. So I know in my current district and in previous districts, we've done a lot more training. My whole student support staff is trained in youth mental health first aid. But years ago, that wouldn't have even been something that was on anybody's radar. So I do think that's a positive change, although I think we have a long, long way to go in that regard.
I'll focus on two specific areas where the board has some oversight, where we've definitely seen changes and lessons learned since Columbine. The first is the area of school drills. The Illinois School Safety Drill Act was amended when most of us were young and went to schools around here. They would have had fire drills with the fire department present, but conceptually the idea of having a lockdown drill was non-existent. It's now mandated, and it's typically done with coordination with police and police presence at the school, so that if there was an emergency situation, that coordination would have been practiced. The other thing that's different is the physical plant of the school. If you haven't been in a grade school or a high school lately, there are a lot of things that would be physically different to see. Things like secured entrances, specially treated glass, in some places teller-style windows to give your ID, remote-activated wireless public address systems, visitor management systems for check-in. All these things are particularly common if you have schools that are new construction or that are having additions done that allow for additional security procedures. Obviously, we wish we didn't have to be doing all these things, but absolutely we have learned in terms of what we're doing with our physical buildings and with our drill procedures.
I just want to piggyback, because since you mentioned the School Safety Drill Act, I was one of the people who helped develop in 2005 the School Safety Drill Act, and schools have to do 6 drills: 1 law enforcement drill, 3 evacuation with the fire department, 1 shelter in place, and 1 bus evacuation. And also, we made it to make sure that private schools have to do this too, so we brought the state fire marshal when we had the committee at the state and said, we want to take care of private schools too. So when they do this drills, they have to report the drills to Regional Office of Education, and if they're a private school, they have to go to the state fire marshal. Besides the drills, they have to review their emergency crisis plan with the first responders, and it could be the police, fire, emergency manager, whoever is their first responders in town. It could be more than their own town, a Cook County emergency manager, a Lake County emergency manager. So they have to review that emergency crisis plan and also initial off and send it to the ROE or the private schools also.
Okay, I'm going to step in with a totally different angle. Randy, I totally appreciate everything that you have to say because I am by no means an expert in school safety whatsoever, and I implement with my students whatever is taught to me and whatever I'm supposed to use and whatever the best practice is. But my friends, I can't help but just be so sad that we have to have this conversation, and especially for those of you who are unfamiliar with the ALICE drill, schools in the area, or with the ALICE program, I'm sorry, but schools in the area are practicing not just lockdown, where they're teaching children to hide in a room and locking a door, which is scary enough, but they are making an announcement, and it's a fake announcement, but there's a shooter in the gym, he's wearing red. You know, students are hearing this over the announcements, and we're teaching students, not necessarily us, but different schools that are doing this are teaching students, okay, what are you thinking? Where are you going? What are your best options? If the shooter is in the gym, should you leave through the window if you're on the second floor and whatnot? And it makes me crazy, makes me so sick and sad to think that when our students are in school and they're supposed to be reasoning about math and science and social studies and literature, not about guns. And so this also brings me around, I think, Dr. Coleman, what you have to say is imperative, that our mental health focus and SEL is so very important. Ben and I work in the same district, and our district is very committed to this. It's very important at school. But here's another thing we encounter, and I'd be so interested to hear what you have to say about this too, Dr. Coleman, that a lot of times we do things at school, and unfortunately we can't count on them to be followed through at home. And that's one thing that's very difficult. So we're not always having a partnership with the home, so we can only do so much at school. Another thing we've encountered, and Ben, I'm sure you could say the same thing, we've offered services to students over the years that parents then have to accept for their students to get the help, and they decline. And they turn the services away, and not only do they decline and turn the services away, but they're really harsh about it and really want us to step back. So being a Moms Demand Action member, I turn to the laws. And I feel like, although of course we have to learn best practices, and if this happens, it's gonna happen, we're gonna learn best practices, we have to focus on laws that we can make to try to keep less guns out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them. That's where my focus would be. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I did wanted to piggyback on the parent piece, and I am a parent, right? So I hope I don't offend anybody when I say this. A lot of the pushback I get at my level is from parents where there has been, I'm going to use cyberbullying as an example, because most threats come in through social media, either on the school's website, and a text to someone, on Snapchat, on Instagram. That is how most of us as administrators get information about students who are thinking about or making threats of some kind. You would not believe the pushback we get when we bring a student into the office and I confiscate their phone until our SRO or another person law enforcement can come in and check. And the threats of lawyers, and you're violating my student rights, and et cetera, et cetera. And you know, we live in this time where parents really are trying to be friends with their kids, and I'm sure you've maybe seen that, whether it comes from parents hosting parties, because I'd rather have my kids drink in my basement where I know they're safe than going and having a party somewhere else where I don't know what they're doing. You know, and I think that is about laws, right? It's against the law to drink before you're 21, whether you want to host that party or not. And now there are other laws that are pretty harsh on parents if that happens and that takes place in your community due to a very tragic incident that happened in Deerfield many years ago. So when I do a lot of presentations for parents, specifically about cyberbullying and sexting, because I find that it's very congruent with what we see with school violence, because it starts from somewhere, and social media is where it starts. So I agree with you that parents often deny services because they don't want their child to seem different, or there's nothing wrong with them, or kids will be kids. And I can only implore you to think twice. Your child might make a really bad decision based on external factors, whether they're being bullied, whether they're being teased, whether their boyfriend broke up with them. There's lots of things the adolescent mind does that is not logical, violence aside. So I think where we used to have more parent support with things like discipline, we are now, especially some of the suburbs where we work, I did not get this when I worked in other less affluent communities, that as a school district, now we have to think about, am I going to get sued? Are we going to use district resources to bring our attorney to this meeting because they're bringing an attorney? And it just sets this us against them mentality that really impacts the safety of all of our kids. And so I would agree with you. You need to know what your kids are doing. You need to know who your kids are hanging out with. And you need to be able at any time to pick up your kid's phone and look through it. And you might say, oh, that's private and I trust my kid. You might trust your kid, but you don't know what other kids are sending your kid. And that is a really important point. And I'm glad you brought it up. And I know some people are going to shoot daggers at me later. But a lot of this starts at home. We don't give guns to kids at school. They bring them. We don't give knives to kids at school. They bring them. And we have to respond to that. And I think we need a lot more responsibility placed on our parents. I think as schools, and I don't know if you agree with me, we are expected to parent your children. I don't expect anyone to parent my kid but me. And I think that has been an enormous shift, actually, since Columbine. Just on a side note, one of the things we've done at our district, I rewrote our behavior policy, and part of our interventions, instead of, with Senate Bill 100 and suspensions, and we can talk about that if that ever comes up, is that we have very specific interventions that students are required to attend. And when a parent says, you can't do that, I say, well, it's in our board policy. Read your parent-student handbook. I don't have to get their permission to provide social work services if there's a text or a tweet or something that comes our way. And I think that that's sad that we have to tell parents that they can go to the school board and, create a stink about the policy if they choose. But that's sort of where we're at, and I think it's important for parents to know is a lot more criticism comes on the shoulders of schools and teachers that we are reacting. And, it is a partnership, and I think that is something we do not always get in return.
Let me jump in on that then. My whole curriculum is pretty much SELs. The social emotional learning, that's what health is. So we hammer that one out, well, to the best of our ability, we do. But it needs to go beyond that. We talk about sexting, we talk about cyberbullying as well. We're dealing with a student right now that has some pretty nasty stuff on social media, and Dad was brought in, and Dad had no clue, not a single clue. Really? This is what's going on here? So we have to go back and reteach these items. And then when I bring in the fire department, when we talk about safety, years ago, right after Columbine, when we just talked about, okay, if the fire alarm's pulled, what do? How are 2 ways out of here? Now, when our fire department comes in, okay, we need 2 ways out of the movie theater, we need 2 ways out of the restaurant, we need 2 ways out of everything. Because of the situation, we're at a concert, we're at Grant Park, what are your exit routes? What do you need to do? And I'm teaching the 6th graders this, so that way they can be prepared, because unfortunately this is how our society is evolving here. It seems like it's a different direction than maybe where we want to go. Instead of teaching them, hey, how are we supposed to respect other people? And now, as we go through, and I know we're going to jump into this a little bit later, but the discussion of us having guns on us to protect students, what is the message that we're sending to the kids? That violence is good, that we want them to have, by us having a gun is good? I've been teaching the kids all along, 18 years, 18 plus, that we need to go ahead and solve problems without violence. What's the gun gonna do for me? And I know we're gonna talk about that in a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that since Columbine, I think that these shootings have gotten worse and more deadly and more frequent as well. And I haven't really seen changes implemented. I mean, I've noticed that these shooters are what changed from starting with NIU and on, that the internet era. They're all purchasing their weapons online, their guns online, ammunition online, and it's just, I just think that there should be more red flags there. I'll get a little more into the NIU shooter and how he got his weapons and everything, but it's just been difficult to see. I remember seeing Columbine on TV when I was in middle school. Then I remember being in my dorm room when Virginia Tech happened and talking to my roommate saying, can you imagine if that ever happened at NIU? And he's like, oh no, that would never happen here. And then 10 months later, I'm shot in a classroom. But it's just, I don't know. I just need to see changes happen. I can't keep living through this tragedy, through these other tragedies as these shootings happen on and on and on. And my mom's been a teacher for 25 years, and she even asked me, she says, Patrick, I don't even know if a gunman came into my school, what would happen. Because she's a teacher up in the northern suburbs as well, far north. And you know, there's a few problem children there too, and she tries to talk to their parents as well and says the same thing as they mentioned that, you know, a lot of them say, oh, it's my kid, don't tell me what to do, but yeah, I just want to see some changes happen.
I just wanted to jump in after what you just said, Patrick. Sorry, Ben, really quickly. You said you want to see change. And I'm sure you're all aware of all of the laws that are going back and forth between the Senate and the House right now in Springfield. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more later. But we certainly hope we're going to see some change for you. Randy, I cut you off. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say that it's a tragic stat that since January 1st, the last time I looked a few days ago, that we had 18 school shootings between K through 12 and college since January 1st of 18 school shootings. And in 2016, I think it was 89 people died of active shooters. And active shooters from the FBI study is 3 or more people that passed away or injured. And in 2017, we had 112 people die, but we had 553 injured because of active shooters. In 2016, we only had 112 injured. It's going up and up, and it's not getting better.
I'm just going to briefly interject. If anybody does have any questions that they've written down on their cards, if you want to just hold them up now, and someone will be around to collect them. So I have another question for Patrick specifically. Patrick, you may be one of the only people in the room who has actually been in an active school shooter situation. Tell us more about what it was like in the room 10 years ago, the effects on your life since then, and the lives of your classmates, their parents and loved ones 10 years later. Also, looking back, do you think anything could have been done differently to prevent that shooting?
Yeah, so I have a visual of what the classroom looks like because it wasn't a normal classroom, it was a large lecture hall, but on Valentine's Day, 2008, I was sitting in my classroom on the left classroom. I was sitting towards the front in the middle row, towards the left aisle. And there were 15 minutes left of class in my geology class when, over by number 2, a guy kicks the door open, walks in with a long trench coat, doesn't say a word, pulls out a shotgun and just starts shooting at us. He just kept shooting and shooting, and my classmates were screaming and crying, and after the third shot, I realized it was real, and I got under my desk, and he kept shooting and shooting. And then all of a sudden, he stopped shooting. Someone in the classroom shouted, "He's reloading." And when that happened, a bunch of students started running towards the back where all those doors are to escape. I crawled to the ramp out of my seat, got up, started running towards the door. He shot again, and I felt a really sharp pain in the back of my head. And I touched my head, and I had blood all over my hand, coming down my neck. And I just kept running out, and I got really dizzy, and I finally made it out. And I told someone was walking, and they were looking at all these kids running out. I said, call 911, call 911. There's a shooter in my classroom. And within about 30 seconds, I saw police officers running in. They grabbed me, found an ambulance for me, and I made it to the hospital when that happened. And ever since then, it's just been a huge effect on my life. I got to the hospital. I found out I was shot in the arm. I didn't even know. They rolled up my sleeve, and I had blood and a big welt on my arm. And the doctor said it could have been from the adrenaline. To this day, I still have shotgun pellets in my neck and in my arm. There were some that were too deep to remove, and the doctor said that it would be better if they left them in there because it would cause more damage trying to remove them. I've gone to the memorials every Valentine's Day, and I see my classmates, the victims. We all form this bond. I've seen how some of my classmates have moved quicker than others as far as moving forward. Some are dealing with it dramatically, so some have moved on after a month. There's a lot of, it just depends on how you deal with a situation like this. But like I had said, I communicate with all of them on Facebook. We're in a Facebook group together. The parents, they told us that since we were the last people to see their children, that they really want to have that connection with us. That I think the most hardest thing was going back to school a week and a half later, the first day back, just going back and seeing all the memorials, all the students. I still had bandages. I went to my first classroom. I walked in, I had bandages still, and just people staring at me. And then I was sitting in class, and I wasn't even paying attention to my favorite class. It was a geography class. I was looking at the door, looking behind me, and it was the hardest thing. But I just talking about that day is difficult too. There's some scenes from that day from my classroom, some of my classmates that were injured. The bottom left is from that night. There was a memorial. The top, there weren't enough ambulances in DeKalb. They had to bring in other towns for the 21 victims. And I'm just very thankful for how quickly the police were able to get there, DeKalb Police, Sycamore Police, NIU Police, and all the EMT staff that came and got us to the hospital. And to answer the last question, anything that could have been done differently, it's a college campus, so there's multiple buildings. He had put all of his guns in a guitar case, and he walked through the back doors. They had said that those back doors were supposed to be locked, but they weren't. But I just think he shouldn't have been able to obtain those weapons. He had a mental illness history. In Illinois, I believe at that time it only went back 2 years of mental health history, and he had stopped going to his mental health meetings and stopped taking his medications, and he just wasn't caught in the background check system. He purchased all of his weapons online. He picked them up from the same gun dealer that the Virginia Tech shooter picked up his weapons, or from online, purchased his weapons. He picked them up down in Urbana-Champaign. He was a grad student there. He's an alumni of NIU. And he just came up to NIU 2 days before and picked Valentine's Day and picked my classroom. And it's sometimes difficult to talk about today. It's been 10 years, but that's the day that changed my life.
Can I just jump in really quick? Patrick, before we started today, Ben and I had an opportunity to talk to you, and you were telling us about the kind of weapon that was used. And so speaking of changes that are worse, will you tell the audience what you were telling us about the weapons that were used as opposed to the even worse ones?
Yeah, I was actually telling them that there were 150 people in my classroom that day. There were, I don't want to say only, but there were only 5 deaths and 21 of us injured. And he had a shotgun and several handguns. And I just say if he had the weapon that was used in Parkland or in Vegas or Sandy Hook, that I wouldn't even be here today. I was shot in the back of the head, and I have shotgun pellets. If a bullet pierced me right here in the back of the head, I don't even know. And if he was able to spit out multiple rounds of bullets within the minutes that he had, I don't even know how many more deaths and injuries there would have been. So that's what I was telling them before, that there's no need for that type of weapon for a civilian to have that. I just don't understand all these shootings that happened, how much, I mean, in Vegas, there were more than 500 people shot. I've met some of those victims. I've met Sandy Hook parents. I've met Virginia Tech victims, Columbine victims. We're all part of this group that we don't want to be a part of, and it's just growing and growing.
Thank you.
I'd like to jump on it, and sorry to hear all the things that's going through. I hope it's getting better for you, hopefully. But he's right, sense that I don't agree. I was a police officer. I don't agree that they should have this kind of weapons. And talking to students around the United States when I consult, I'm so proud of the students that walking out, doing things, because maybe they'll change something, because obviously we can't change things right now, and maybe the future of the students that maybe will change a lot of things, because it's not necessary. There's no reason to why you have these kind of weapons to sell them and people use it in schools. It's just outrageous.
So I want to kind of shift our focus slightly to school safety plans. So this is open to our school safety specialists, as well as our school board president, our administrator, our teachers. We know you can't tell us details of your school safety plan for obvious reasons, but do you feel that your own school safety plan is significantly different than the one in Parkland? And we know there are lots of different kind of safety plans out there. Some are basically just a lockdown approach. Some newer ones like Alice and similar programs empower teachers to run or hide or even counter. What makes a good school safety program in your opinion?
Well, I speak for this for hours. I'm going to try to narrow it down as much as I can. So I brought some notes for you. First of all, a good emergency crisis plan, you're working with a multidisciplinary team. So you're working with first responders, you're working with mental health, and you're working with all your stakeholders in the community to work with emergency crisis plan, like utility companies. I always brought in students in, because students are important, because they know the pulse of your schools, they know what's going on with your schools. So I always asked them for tip lines, what's the best way we could get information to our staff and to us to make sure nothing would happen. And the students, the last place where I was at, they wanted texting, called Texting a Tip, because you care, and that was our whole slogan, and we promoted that. And the last year I was there, we saved 4 students who were going to be committing suicide in the middle of the night, that students actually text us. And obviously, if you have a text line, you have to answer 24 hours. It always went to me or the deans. And then we let law enforcement know, and they went to the house and actually stopped the 4 kids, different times of the year, of that year. So one is getting students involved. Also is the 5 phases is like prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. So that covers a lot of your plans. Prevention, there's a lot of things you could do prevention, about training, having one single door in your school that they go through and somebody's there questioning, have trap systems in there so people can't get in there, part of emergency planning. Having systems like if a door is propped open, have an alarm go off to the person who's a security person or teacher, letting people know there's someone propped the door open and checking that out. But for a good emergency crisis plan, there's a lot of things they have to take in place, and it's a living document. So if I put the emergency crisis plan on the shelf and never touch it, that's a terrible emergency crisis plan, because we're not training on it. You have to train. People have to understand, from bus drivers to cafeteria workers to teachers to students to parents. Everybody has to understand their role, part of that emergency crisis plan. And also that, we talked about threat assessment teams. Schools by law in Illinois have to have an incident command structure team, which is what the police train on and the fire department trains on, and on a command team that comes in place during emergency. So administrators are trained on this and has a structure, so when police and fire come, they blend together during an emergency, so they work closely together. And also, communication is a key factor. If I can't communicate what's going in my building to the students and staff or outside people there, we're in trouble, because we're going to lose people because they don't know that's going on in lockdown, or they don't know what's going on the evacuation. So some of the things, that clever things that your schools could do, is that in those big band areas and the big pool areas or gym areas, a lot of times you can't hear the announcements. So how those kids hear it, so when I was a director, I put lights in the gyms and band areas. So if the red light goes out, they might not hear the PA, but they know, hey, it's a hard lockdown, we got to get in place, and this is what we're supposed to do. If it's a yellow light, it's evacuation. So we had lights, and then they would listen to the PA after that point. Once they see that light, they would act on it. So there's a lot of things you could do, part of emergency crisis plan. I mean, there's so much, I can't go through everything, but there's a lot that they could do. And they got to make sure that they have backup roles for people that are managing emergency for school people. Because if she's not there, and she might be in a meeting, who's taking her spot to handle that emergency with them? So that's all about training. And then it's important that conducting those drills properly, because how you train is how you're going to react in that emergency situation live. So if people are not taking it serious, or they let the teacher stay in the evacuation and the student in his teacher lounge and they don't come out because they think this is just a drill, shame on them, because they should act like it is real when you evacuate. So you act like that during a real drill. So it's important to take those drills seriously and working with first responders and make sure everybody's working together. And then also that do a physical security assessment of your building. You don't have to hire me, but maybe have local law enforcement come in or somebody else to look at your building and see what you're lacking and work on those things to make it better for your school. But I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
I just want to piggyback on what Randy said. One of the districts I worked in that Randy was a consultant, we had that very same problem in our shop class, because, not to mention that could be a very dangerous place in general, but when those kids are in session, they don't hear the announcements, they barely can hear a fire alarm. And so we as a district had to look very closely at what are our problem areas within the building and do an internal audit to see who can hear what and when. And it took, it takes money, so first and foremost. And then it takes training to train the students to look for certain signs in different environments within the building, because it doesn't look the same in a locker room as it does in a classroom, as it does in the cafeteria. The first question was, how do we feel about our safety plan, and has it changed over time? We are required by law, as Randy said, to do mandated drills. We are constantly evaluating our safety plan, whether it was in regards to Parkland or in regards to a threat that we may have received. To making sure, I think the most important part of a safety plan, whether you're going to use the Alice model or some of the others, is that it has to fit your staff, your building, your environment, because every building looks different. The safety in place spaces are different, and so that's the most important piece. There's not one program that is going to fit all the needs of each different school. We have where I work, we have a high school. It has a preschool in it. So that was a big conversation. The kids who are paying to go to preschool, their parents aren't on the overall emergency like school messenger system. So we learned that a few weeks ago. So how are we going to address that so those parents of those kids know if there's something going on? The other thing I think that you may or you probably don't know, but what we in school districts have been looking into are some online protections. So some of you, I don't know, raise your hand if your kids go to a school where they use Securely. So that's a system that, so we do in Vernon Hills and Libertyville for sure. So every week I get a text message that shows the sites and the search words my own kids have been looking for on their district device. We also have in place in some districts, actually many districts around the area, this product, it's called Gaggle. It works with Google. There are live people who go through search words, and there's an algorithm to find terms in their emails, in their papers, in their communications, that then it goes to a live person if there's a threat. And so those are changes we've made in addition to safety plans, that what happens on a regular basis. So in my current district, Like, I'm the 24-hour person. So that means if at 3 o'clock in the morning, someone from this company has to call and say, we just saw this, like, that's going to my phone. And then, you know, we have a backup, obviously. But, so those are some other things that schools do to try to prevent and get a handle on whether it's for suicide or depression or, you know, acts of violence as well. So those are some of the things that school districts administratively have put in place to try to get some preventative information on our kids' behavior.
I know for us, we use Securely as well in Gaggle, and trust me, my principal comes to me all the time saying, did you talk about this? Because Gaggle pops up and it sends it straight back to her. Drugs, depression, suicide, violence in general, and making sure that I've covered those topics. No, I didn't cover that one. And we go back and take a look at that student and run a history off their device, whether it's iPad or whatever it might possibly be. But those are some new changes that we've had in place for several years, past maybe 3-4 years now, I think. In addition to having all the doors locked and so forth, and I know my superintendent contacted me right after, I think it was actually February 16th, is when she contacted me, reminding to make sure that all the staff remembered to keep the doors locked. We do not need to have any of the doors propped open. And I just made sure that all the staff in the district were well aware of that. But some of the things that we are still working on are if we're outside and what happens. And that's something that we've discussed. If PE is outside, they're on the track, a lockdown happens, what are we going to do? We just implemented Alice in our district this year, where we've been taught that, and it's a change from when we first started to, hey, hard lockdown, go up against the whiteboard, turn off the lights, lock the door, sit quietly until we are cleared by security personnel or admin. And now it's completely different. So it takes a little bit. Trust us, no one likes change. No one. A human being does not like change. It's hard for us. So that's a hard thing for us to do.
And real quick, I want to jump on your thing for a second. Also, schools they do a perfect drill all the time, like on a lockdown drill or whatever it is. No one's in the cafeteria. So what they should be doing, and you don't get to simulate it. I used to do this all the time. I would put 400 kids in the cafeteria at 9 o'clock in the morning. We're going to do an active shooter drill or lockdown drill, but I want to see how fast I could get those kids into a lockdown in the cafeteria. But it's not lunchtime because we have to obviously feed them. It's in the morning, but we're going to act like it's lunchtime. So you should do drills at different times of day, because how about after school? You have less staff there. What's going on, and how are you training people after school? I always like to do evacuation drills and active shooter drills together. And the reason why, because then I have first responders from fire and police there together, watching everything and working together. And that's the most important, is everybody's working together to make it better for your schools.
Very briefly, we just had a question from several audience members. Alice has been mentioned several times. Can someone very briefly just explain what that is?
Well, I don't like promoting anything.
Right, just the program.
Yeah, it's a program that some people have run, hide, fight. Some people have else, which is similar, but it's a little bit different with communication. I believe, and I tell these people just from school, people all over the United States, is that you have to give options. Whatever program you use to fight back or run or hide, whatever it is, you have to have options for teachers. You can't just have hard lockdown in place because it's not feasible anymore. So it's a program that obviously people use, and they're running. There's times they're running, they're fighting back, and there's times that they're locking down. But I'm not promoting one program. I just think that whatever you use, you got to train on it and make sure everybody understands it and work with local first responders. Okay?
So let's shift our focus just slightly, because I don't want to run out of time. Let's talk about some other approaches to actually preventing gun violence in schools before a shooting incident takes place. We have recently seen significant bipartisan work toward more common sense gun legislation, and politicians on both sides of the aisle saying that this is not a political issue, but a safety and human health issue. Do you think federal or state legislation could have done anything to reduce some or any of these school shooting incidents? Is there any legislation we should consider passing at a state or federal level, in your opinion, that is not in place today?
I'll start. I personally think, as we take a look at laws, look, we have laws on tobacco, we've got laws on alcohol. I think there needs to be some laws regarding guns, stricter laws regarding guns. I mean, look at the age of when kids and people can start using some of these drugs and so forth. So that's one of the things to change those. But also, and Carol and I were talking about this earlier, I think when we created the Constitution, our forefathers thought, all right, great, right to bear arms, that's fine, protection and so forth. Not military grade style weapons that I don't think need to be out in the community. If I need those, I'll help out the U.S. by joining the military, but I don't need them in my house. Because I know if they're going to be in my house, my 11-year-old is going to want to try and use that. He's going to show it off to his friends at home and shoot someone by accident. I think that putting those pieces together will help, but then we also need the mental health component and more funding for that instead of getting ripped or cut each time. Those are the things there. I'll let someone else speak.
I just wanted to jump into, you wanna go? I am in full support of what you are saying. I find it ironic that I need a license to fish at a catch and release forest preserve, but I can buy a military grade weapon online. So I definitely think our priorities are a little backwards when it comes to that. Our students have to go through lots of driving and training before they get a driver's license. So we have these things in place for other areas of our lives. But for some reason, when it comes to deadly weapons, it's not the time to talk about it. It's too political. You're politicizing somebody's tragedy. So I think at the same time that we hear that we can't make this change on assault rifle bans, we are cutting mental health services, whether it's the Department of Rehabilitative Services, if it's our adult service organizations, if it's the cuts to Social Security and Medicaid. All of that impacts the way that we can help and support our most vulnerable neighbors in our population. And so, when we talk about what kind of laws that make common sense, it took like a couple kids dying from taking their parents, Advil to put a safety cap on medicine. But we see this over and over and over again. And personally, I am exhausted from the same rhetoric we hear from both sides of our government.
Okay, so this is a yes. The answer is yes. From the perspective of the school district, any bill that would keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people within the bounds of Second Amendment can and will help. Our schools, and it turns out a lot of people don't know this, are represented in Springfield and Washington, D.C. by professional lobbyists whose job it is to look out for our interests, and that's everything from school safety to unfunded mandates for curriculum, to school finance formula. We are represented and we are heard in these locations. They contact us and let us know when we need to raise our voices. Hey, this property tax freeze could be an issue. Hey, this gun sense bill could be helpful. They let us know these things, they keep us informed, and they let us know when they're acting on our behalf and when they need us collectively as a board or as an administrator to reach out and call and say, hey, with my board hat on, with my administrator hat on, I want you to do this. I am lucky and fortunate to be able to report that where we live here, where most of us teach, we are represented at the federal and state level by true gun sense champion legislators, people who vote consistently against the bad bills and for the good bills. I will highlight one specifically. That's a federal bill called Concealed Carry Reciprocity. For those who are not yet familiar with that bill, that's a bill that most gun sense champs would strongly oppose. It's a bill that tries to treat a permit to carry a gun like a driver's license, so that if you can drive in Minnesota, you can drive in Illinois. They want to say if you can drive in Montana, you can drive that gun over to Illinois and have it, whether you meet the Illinois requirements or not. A driver's license operates within a certain bound, anywhere from 14 or 15 to 17. You have to take a certain number of road hours. You have to take a written test. But the rules for a gun permit vary greatly from state to state. Some are permitless carry jurisdictions, and others are ones where you have to take training and registration and background checks and mental health screens. And so this is a bill that for school districts is really frightening. It is the kind of bill that would make people feel like they could potentially carry guns in schools or violate the laws more freely. Each and every building in our district bears a sign to affirm that our schools are gun-free zones, that they will remain gun-free zones regardless of any changes at the federal level. But the thought that passing a bill like CCR could undermine the impact of those signs is really frightening for schools. So absolutely, yes, we favor legislation. That's one of the best examples, but it's far from the only one that we're monitoring, that we're watching through our lobbying teams, and that we cheer on our state and federal reps as they fight for us on this front.
I'm going to add to that, and I want to make sure you really heard clearly what Tracy said about this concealed carry reciprocity, which, by the way, did pass the House. Was it December that it passed? Very recently, it passed the House of Representatives in the United States of America. Okay? You can bet you know who had to do with that. And it will eventually go to the Senate. And when it does, we have to be ready to stop it. And so this is when I'm going to put on my Moms Demand Action hat and tell you, we're going to tell you about a lot of bills, but you really can help to support them, and you can help to defeat the bad ones. And if you join our ranks, we will be teaching you who to call and who to reach out to. But I'd like to highlight a little bit more of the legislation that's been going on lately. I know the Moms Demand Action members are familiar with Senate Bill 1657. That has been worked on by Senator Bill Harmon for more than 10 years. It's the Gun Dealer Licensing Act, and this bill would do many things for safety in the state, but above all would force everybody to be licensed. Just like you guys were saying earlier, all of us are licensed. Your hairdresser is licensed. The gun dealers need to be licensed. And of course, the gun dealer themselves may be licensed, but then their employees may not be. So this would require background checks for everybody that works for the gun dealership. It would require hours of training. You just talked about the hours of training for driving a car. We're talking about for working with deadly weapons. I'm telling you, not everybody is required to have training that works in a gun store. The first time that I heard that, I was outraged. The bill would also require video surveillance. I know lots of stores that you go to, the jewelry store has video surveillance, right? So why would a store that sells lethal weapons not have it? So the law would require that. It also would require that gun stores not come in within 1,000 feet of a school or a daycare. So these are the kinds of things that Senate Bill 1657 represented, and a bunch of us were in Springfield and were able to celebrate when it did pass. It passed the Senate last April and did pass in the House February 28th. And how many of you are familiar with what happened just a couple of days ago with our friend, Mr. Rauner? Mr. Rauner vetoed it. This does not mean, although we're pretty heavy-hearted about this does not mean that it's over. And we are hoping to be able to override that veto. So you need to be reaching out to your senators and anybody in the red shirt here. Well, Sarah Kanishnik. And please share that information widely with all your friends and family. And also, please keep this in mind when you go to vote in the primaries, that these are decisions that our lawmakers are making and we need to hold them accountable. I would also like to tell you about Jonathan Carroll, who is a House representative from my area. Part of his district is in Buffalo Grove, where I live, but he introduced a 3-day wait period on guns. That was fantastic, and that passed as well, but it's waiting to be signed. Am I getting this correct? By the governor, but it did pass. Also, there was a bump stock bill that went through that also passed and is being waited, or we are waiting to see that it will be signed. But if you are unfamiliar with a bump stock, that is what you can add to your firearm to give it this capacity to become a lethal weapon. There was also a bill that was brought up in Springfield to raise the age of being able to own an assault rifle from 18 to 21. All of these bills are active right now down in Springfield. So make sure that you make your voices heard. One more thing, then I promise I'm passing it. The subject of suicide has come up. We work with children. We work with teenagers. What's the first thing you think about when you think about teenagers? Impulsive, right? They get an idea they're going to do something. If they can get a hold of a gun, they're going to do it, right? We have this wonderful program for Moms Demand Action that I'd like to tell you about called Be Smart, and there will be information about it in the lobby afterwards if you're interested. But this program seeks to inform parents about, for example, how to bring up the topic of secure storage of firearms in their homes before play dates. It informs teachers how to ask parents about secure storage of weapons at home. A lot of these tragedies that we've seen taking place are because, not that the person shouldn't have been able to have a gun in the home, but the parent did not properly store it, and therefore the child was able to get a hold of it and bring it to school. So while supporting the Second Amendment that people should be able to have guns if they pass all the requirements, they have to be stored securely. And this wonderful program, Be Smart, is something that we work on as well. And I'm going to stop talking. Whose turn?
Well, we are going to have to kind of move along quickly here because we are going to move to some audience questions soon. But there's just a few more that I wanted to ask. I suspect I know how many of you are going to feel about this, but last week Florida passed a bill in both chambers that now sits on their governor's desk to sign into law. This permits teachers and other select people in schools to be armed with guns. There are actually 10 states in our country that have already passed laws allowing guns in schools and teachers to be armed. On February 14th, an hour after the news of Parkland broke, the NRA began raising money to support a teachers training program aimed at arming teachers with guns. In Illinois, currently our law does not permit guns in schools, but should the momentum change in Illinois, what do you think of this idea? Do you, as a teacher, one who supports educators or a school safety specialist, or one that was in a school shooting situation, do you think teachers want to be armed? And do you think this would make our schools and kids more safe?
I just said I would shut up, but I can't, Leah, because I'm in a classroom every day, and I absolutely will not carry a gun. I would have to leave my profession. I am more than halfway through my career. My husband, who is a high school teacher, I will not allow him to carry a gun. And beyond that, I will not teach in a school where other teachers are required or choose to carry guns. And Ben, something you said, I've never even thought of that before, that we should be carrying guns, so we should be treating violence with violence. Protect violence with violence. This makes absolutely no sense. The chaos that goes on in a classroom in a day, the things that you don't know about that are going on in your classroom in a day, on top of them, the chaos of a shooter, I have no words. No.
Yeah, I can jump in real quick. Absolutely not. Even if you ask my professor, if he had a gun in our classroom, would he have been able? What happened? The way I could explain when a gunman comes into your classroom or comes into whatever building you're in, is it's the same thing as your mind completely shuts down. It's the same thing as if you're driving and then all of a sudden a car comes at you and you're about to get into a car accident. It's not like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull over to the side. The car is going to go. That's what people are thinking, that if we're armed with guns in our classroom, the shooter's going to come in, we're going to be ready. Your mind completely shuts down. Your brain doesn't think that way. You go into pure panic mode. I know what it was like. I was in there. My professor knows what it's like. He was in there. All 149 of my classmates know what it's like. None of us even think that if we were armed with guns that anything would have changed, because it doesn't. Not at all.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. It's crazy to have teachers armed at school. If you want more guns in school, have the police officers back there, have more police officers in the building, have off-duty police officers in your building. They're trained properly. They have mental health training. They train all the time. They're the professionals, not teachers. But some of the things I wrote down that you have to worry about is legal counsel. How do we now work with this? Who gets trained? Friendly fire. What kind of firearms? Are they going to have bulletproof vests? Where are they storing them? How much training they're going to get? And then when first responders come in, how do they recognize that that person is a teacher and not the bad guy? And so there's a lot of issues with teachers with things, and I don't believe teachers should be having guns in school.
I agree. No, thanks. I don't want a gun, but I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's up in Crystal Lake is a gun dealer that is giving away free lessons or training to educators for gun safety, should that pass. And if you think about it, after February 14th, we've had in the news teachers with guns. I believe one was in Georgia who shot out. And so what is, I don't understand. Here's the other thing. I carry a gun on me, right? What happens if I have a mental illness?
That's true.
Well, and I have a bad day. You know, someone gets on my nerve.
That never happens.
No, it doesn't happen. I have great days. But I'm just saying, if an adult is not stable and they have a weapon, or they put the gun somewhere and they leave the classroom for a minute, or a substitute comes in, we think we have that knee-jerk reaction. That's what we do. Something happens and we got to respond back, but we don't think things through properly. And also remember, the human brain doesn't finish developing until age 24. That's when it's fully done. Up until that point, decision-making is way down. 24.
For men. I want to clarify.
That's true.
It's actually 24 for men and 19 for women.
That is true.
Thank you for that.
Which does not mean women should carry guns
good.
either. I want to piggyback on that. I'm responsible for sort of maintaining law and order, if you will. And so, like, my legal counsel is on my speed dial for a variety of reasons, through the district, not my personal one. There's so many holes in this ridiculous idea. Starting with, when you're engaged and you love what you're doing with kids, it is not first nature to then shoot one. And there was a story, I think it was 2 days ago, that there was a safety demonstration in a classroom with the gun. The teacher shot the ceiling, shrapnel came down, hit this kid in the neck. One teacher shot her foot while she was in the bathroom. So that was in Oklahoma. So I can only say that as educators, first of all, none of us went into this field so that we could carry guns and have to be in the position to maybe shoot someone. That's not why we went into education. Secondly, that is something, just like we talk about practicing drills, and it's not something you do all the time. So that is why having law enforcement handle that level of security with weapons, that's something they're trained and they do all the time. And I don't know about you, but my son has ADHD, and the last thing I need is a teacher in April, exhausted, with my student perhaps engaging in behavior that might just throw them over the edge. So, that's not what we signed up for. And I would agree with what both of you said. I wouldn't work for a district for all the tea in China if that was something that our school board promoted. And thankfully, I'm fairly certain our school board would not promote that. It's such a ridiculous idea. The fact that we're even having a national conversation about it is frightening in and of itself.
Yeah, this is a hard no for our district. This is not something we're interested in or investigating. Educators are education professionals. This is outside the scope of what they should be asked to do. We've had a couple of oblique references to the fact that the school board controls the purse, the money is with us. It will not be spent on this. And it's absolutely a fair question and concern in terms of who you're putting on the board to make sure this is not where they want those dollars going.
Thank you.
We'd have to sign the contract.
Okay.
I would not sign that contract.
Yeah, the way the law is written now in certain states, that it's up to each individual district to determine whether or not they will allow teachers to conceal carry. You know, on a separate note, I worked in a district where the thought of having our police officer have an assault rifle locked up in a cabinet. And we had a very serious conversation as administrators. And what the research has said, and I'm sure you'll back me up on this, Randy, is by the time you get to that gun cabinet, open up that, lock, get to where you're going to be, that damage is already done. So, I know that's a conversation with a lot of school resource officers are having with districts now. Like, should we have assault rifles in our school to be used by police officers? And I know where I am and in previous districts that is not something that we as an administrative would support, and which was also verified by the law enforcement municipality we work with.
So, Patrick, on February 14th of this year, you were actually at the NIU campus honoring the 10-year anniversary of the NIU school shooting. What was it like hearing the news of Parkland on that 10-year anniversary? And also, tell us more about how you've connected with other mass shooting and school shooting survivors and the bond you share and the work you do together.
Yeah, so this past Valentine's Day, I was at NIU. It was a 10-year memorial, so it was a larger event. There were about 50 of my classmates came back, and all of the parents of my classmates that were killed. We were all in a room, just gathered together, just talking, and a little reception. And at 3:06 p.m. is when the shooting happened. So at 3:06 p.m. is when we were going to go lay the wreaths on my classmates' memorials. So about 2:25, 2:30, some of us started looking our phones. I have news alerts on my phones, and some other people do. We start looking at our phones, and I just see the alert that just says, shooting reported at high school in Florida, multiple people shot. And I was sitting across from one of the parents that lost their child, and one of my classmates was next to me, and both of us saw our phones, and we were just going like this. And one of the parents looked at us and said, "Why are you guys looking at your phone like that?" And we just looked at them and just said, there were just reports of a shooting down in Florida, multiple people shot, and they just looked down and they said, "We can't believe this." And then you start hearing more and more people talking about it in the room that looked at their phones. They were trying to stay quiet about it because we were getting ready to remember my classmates. Every Valentine's Day is really hard for me, and this was the 10-year, so it was even harder because it was a big milestone, and there were a lot of people from the community that were outside waiting for us to come out to lay the wreaths. And then anytime a mass shooting happens is another reminder of what happened to me. But for this shooting that happened on the anniversary of another shooting was just, it weighed a lot on us. It was very difficult. I couldn't sleep that night. I was up with my classmates. We were in a big group chat on Facebook talking about what could we do for the kids in Parkland. And we were just talking, we were gonna write letters. We were gonna try to go out there and visit. And to answer the second question, I'm part of a private Facebook group of mass shooting victims. When I had joined it, it was around Sandy Hook time. It was created by a victim of Columbine. There were probably about 200 members in it. Now there's like 750 members. There were just in the past few months, about 200 people were added from Las Vegas, from the Pulse shooting, from Parkland, from some church members down in Texas, from the shooting at the high school in Kentucky. The list goes on. And one post I just was showing some people here that a student just posted from Parkland in that group. We're there to offer support to each other because what happened to me, right after NIU, is I went out to Virginia Tech for their one-year memorial 2 months after NIU, and I spoke with the victims from Virginia Tech, and they guided us, saying it's going to be a really hard road for you, PTSD, and it's going to be difficult to go back to school to just deal with this. But the Post had said that this student, she saw 5 of her classmates killed in her classroom when the gunman came in. Her best friend was in her classroom and died bleeding next to her. And she just posted in the group, she says, I'm about to go back to school at Douglas High School, and I just don't know what to do. I don't know if I'm going to bear to go back to school. And there were 50 comments, all from mass shooting survivors from Columbine, Virginia Tech, NIU, Aurora, Sandy Hook. Everyone just commented on there and gave advice to her. And that is something that she said, I'm so thankful for you guys as support. I'm so glad I found this group. I feel better prepared to go back to school. And so that's my connection with all these victims, that the support we have is I reach out to victims. I've friends on Facebook with Sandy Hook parents. The list goes on. And it's just a sad group to be a part of. And we're all together now. We're just trying to think of what can we do to make a change. We're so proud of these kids in Parkland to speak out. Social media is helping with that, for them to do that. And I just hope there's a change.
Thank you for your work with
And I just want to add to Patrick what we can do. We can honor you with our action, Patrick, and we will continue to honor you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Honor you, honor you. Please go to marches. These students, how many of you saw them all over the news marching? Millions of them. They are going to save this country.
Well, that was actually going to be my last
please
question.
Encourage them.
I was going to ask one last question before then Megan is going to come up with some audience questions. We have seen the students in Florida start a national conversation about the role that students play in reducing gun violence in schools and even outside of schools. What do you think of this movement? How have you seen your students respond? And what do you think students' roles should be in reducing gun violence, if at all?
So as a parent, I was very proud of my kids and my friends' kids who helped to organize the event at their high school. As an administrator, we had other concerns about the walkout. Our first concern was school safety. You are now advertising that all these students are leaving a secure environment, walking down the streets, and that is a concern. That was a big concern for us. At the district I work in, our students, it was very student-driven. They worked with us. They came up with the plan. They had a purpose. That was our question. What's the purpose of your walkout? And they had a very specific purpose. At our particular school, the purpose was a memorial. And so they decided what that would look like. The students coordinated with the police. We were there to support them, but it was very student-driven. Our students decided to march to the football field, and they read a 1-minute bio of each of the victims from Parkland. And that's what our kids decided to do. Our middle schools, we didn't want them walking out either. So their plan, they walked around the building silently for 17 minutes. If you can picture 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and their group took, researched and found bios of school shooting victims, not just Parkland, but Sandy Hook, Aurora, NIU, and put them all over the walls. And it was a silent walk. It was pretty amazing to see. I was pretty proud of our kids. And that's how they chose to send this message. And I think it's important that we encourage our students to find their voices, because in just 1 or 2 years, they are voters. And to all those politicians who say, oh, these kids, like, what do they know? They're your constituents. We had a huge voting drive at our high school in conjunction with this walkout, where our students were helping their peers register to vote. And I think that any politician who does not pay attention to that we'll see the consequences and the ramifications of that as we move forward in the next year or two.
I think we saw a wide variety of responses from schools. I think at both the high school and elementary level, people struggled with a way to handle this as a respectful and optional memorial observation without veering into the territory of political activity. For the K-8 building, obviously, age was a factor in how to handle this safely. We did initially plan within our district for an observation for 4th through 8th graders that would have been indoor, but at the behest of some students who were really strongly committed to the idea that walkout did indeed mean outside, the teachers and administration worked together with the students in order to make that plan a reality. And we did in the end have about 400 of our junior high school students have a silent observation and walk outside in the snowy backfield behind our junior high school. Lower grade students in 4th and 5th grade had an optional ability to discuss in current events or other appropriate curricular areas, but it was also an optional observation. And so we had students with a menu of choices. There were the students who chose outside. There were students who chose to participate in an exercise called What's Your 17? To talk about 17 meaningful things they could do in different ways, as well as the option to have a study hall. And so I think that sort of a respectful, inclusive observation was what you hoped to see from the schools in the area, and in large part you did. And I hope you'll continue to see that as our students continue to mobilize and stay involved in this critical policy area.
I'm not going to give too many details, but just say quickly that because I'm a parent in my district, I was extremely disappointed in the response that was made clear to students that they were not to walk out and there would not be a walkout. So I urge you, the reason I'm telling you this is that I urge you as parents to make your voices heard when you think that children should be allowed to express their views. Because as teachers, we are sometimes told that we may not participate in things we feel strongly about.
I'm going to just really briefly turn it over to Megan Kavarkis. She's one of our Moms Demand Action leaders, and she's going to take just a few of the audience questions. In the interest of time, we're going to direct each of the questions to just one of you, and then we're going to wrap things up. Thank you.
Good evening. We had so many great questions, but we've had to prioritize those most related to this panel. So we'd love to answer them though. So I'd encourage you to attend your local moms meeting, and hopefully we can answer most of your questions then or out in the lobby this afternoon or this evening. Whoever would like to answer this first question. What are teachers' unions doing to protest requirements for shooter drills? Can the unions press for stronger common sense gun laws? What can we do to engage educators and administrations to get involved in pushing for these laws?
Guess that goes to me. Our union works with the IEA, Illinois Education Association. We are working to try and push gun laws. In regards to the administration in our district, I mean, they're pretty adamant in regards to gun restrictions and so forth. We're trying to make a push. That's what the IEA is doing. That's what our union's trying to do. We're trying to get people to understand, here are the repercussions of this. It's just trying to get people out there and voting, and that's one of the things that I tell my union, my members, we got to go out there and vote, and we got to push it out to everyone else. So when you start getting those robocalls, which are a pain, let's be honest, some of that's our fault, unfortunately. Sorry.
Thank you. This would be for the administrators. Since teachers, social workers, and psychologists are often first responders for issues of student threats, how are administrators and district personnel supporting these professionals and taking threats seriously and addressing the social emotional needs at hand?
That's a great question, and it has a very multifaceted answer. There's a macro answer with how we support social emotional learning in our curriculum and with our staff. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the head of our crisis response team, which is kind of like what happens after an incident. We provide, I can speak sort of generally because I've been an administrator in a few different districts in different roles, but I've always had the same responsibility over my student support staff, which is social workers, guidance counselors, psychologists, and the like. we provide very intensive training for these individuals. I mentioned earlier, currently our staff are all trained in youth mental health first aid. They get trained on the SOS, which is signs of suicide. They're trained on threat and risk assessments. We have very specific protocols in place of what to do when as part of our crisis response team and who's responsible for following the steps in that protocol. So I feel very confident in not only my current staff with the multiple buildings I oversee, but as well in previous districts, some around here, that our boards of education have always supported the need for us to provide more mental health training to our first responders, which is what we call our student support staff in the district.
Thank you. This question is actually for Randy. I asked our school district psychologist if we had a program in place that would act as a response to intervention for distressed and possibly violent students for kindergarten through 8th grade. And she said they don't have a specific program or name for what they do. Is a behavioral threat assessment what I was asking about? And is this the only option for districts?
Threat assessment would help that district out, and it's free training, so they know that if they would call the Online Executive Institute, the training boards, they can schedule a training that comes right to their school. Myself and like 5 other people actually come out for free for them through the state. But there's a multifaceted of obviously training that they should go through, which she just said, which I agree with everything, that they have to have multiple training on different things. And so I'm sure your school district, there's certain things they can't tell you about plans, but I'm sure that they're looking at all those avenues, and there is training to help them out. So if you talk to them again, let them know there is free training out there that could help them out for that situation.
Thank you. This might be for the teachers. How young is too young to discuss this threat with your child, and what can we do to prepare young kids to be vigilant and report things that make them uncomfortable?
What a heartbreaking question.
You want to start, or you want me to start? You start. Early, I'm talking kindergarten to start talking about safety. I mean, if we think about safety, we talk about safe touch and in regards to sexual abuse, which is mandated by state law. That's early on. Might as well talk about gun safety at that time. If you think about our news nowadays, it's 24/7. Everything, we're bombarded. It's breaking news. Everything's breaking news. Everything. Okay. Many parents give their children phones at the age of 6. So they have that access to technology there. I think we need to make sure that we teach early and often in order for us to start going through that. Now, there's some parents that say, well, wait a minute, why are we talking about this? Why should we be talking? Or, you know what, I'm going to let the teachers talk about gun safety. Because let's be honest, maybe some parents aren't very comfortable with that. That's fine, but just don't leave it all to us to take that initiative.
I think it's important to tell them, if you see something, say something. It's really, really important because, like you said, social media is out there. It's so much, and I'm not good at, I'm older, I'm 55 years old. I wouldn't grow up in social media. So, my kids are big in social media, but all the kids are big in it. So there's so many things on social media that they see, and maybe don't say anything because they don't understand it, but it's important to let them know that they see something on social media also, to let the adult know, because a lot of things could be stopped. And especially with active shooters, there's a lot of leakage. We call it leakage or warning signs, but there is a lot of leakage, and people put those together, we could stop a lot of different things, those situations.
And I think, real quick here, that media persona that we view everything and take a look at everything, I think that's feeding into some of this as well as being more mass casualty. I want to one-up the next person. I want to one-up this. I want to try and be the best. And they're getting bits and pieces from whatever school shooting that they possibly can, or on the internet, they think everything's true on there, and they're using it against us. Being on the front lines, we're there, and then your children as well.
Carolyn, did you want to add something? Okay. Last question for the night. If parents have a child that is struggling, that they cannot parent, what can they do to get help? Do these parents risk going to jail if they cannot be honest about the risk that their child is facing, or do they risk being sued?
So I'll take that one. If ever a parent feels like their child is struggling, all schools have processes in place to get further evaluation and assessment to determine what needs the child has. Every school has a referral process. It's mandated by law under the Individuals with Education with Disabilities Act and the American Disabilities Association Act. So there are laws already in place that require us to do what's called child find, which means that if we, as teachers and staff members, feel like or we see that somebody is struggling, we are required by law to follow certain steps. Ultimately, it's the parent's decision to sign consent for some of these things, which I think is what you mentioned earlier about some difficulties. But what we tell all of our parents, if you have concerns, if you have, we all have students that we've worked with who are very violent at home, maybe keep it together at school, and they're very aggressive at home, and these parents are asking for help. We have support systems built in place. I know in my district, in the districts I've worked in, I'm positive in other districts, those same people, your psychologists, your social workers, your guidance counselors, they are trained in all of that. We don't judge you as parents if your child is struggling. That's not our role. That's not what comes up. We look at the student, we look at their individual needs, and then we work on a plan to help address that. So I would hope that no parent ever feels that they're embarrassed or to talk very confidentially with a student service member about what's going on with their kid.
Thank you so much. Let's give a big round of applause to all of our panelists from this evening. I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, and I apologize for that. I have a feeling we could talk about this for hours, but we do need to wrap things up. I'd like to share a few different things that you can do to get more involved really quickly. You can join one of our local Moms Demand action groups, talk to anybody with a red shirt on about that. You can take some actions. We've got an action sheet. There are some tables at the back of the foyer with some action items that you can take away with you today. There's a table on our Be Smart program as well, which we very briefly mentioned, that it talks about safe gun storage and the prevention of unintentional child shootings and suicides. So we encourage you to check that out as well. We want to give a quick thank you to our t-shirt maker who made and sold shirts for tonight, Lisa Cohen. A portion of the proceeds will go to Moms Demand Action. And then finally, we are supporting students with a couple of upcoming events in our area. The first is in just 2 days. This Saturday, we are having a very exciting workshop for students in the suburbs here in the Chicagoland area with the national founder and leader of Moms Demand Action, Shannon Watts. And if you know of any high school leaders who might be interested in learning more about gun violence prevention, we do have a few spots left open for Saturday's workshop. So please see one of us to talk about that. And then also on April 24th, we are co-sponsoring the March for Our Lives event in Vernon Hills. You can get details on this also and one of the tables out in the hall. Thank you once again to our wonderful hosts, Congregation BJBE, the BJBE Youth Group, and St. Gregory's Episcopal Church. So now please join us out in the entryway for some yummy snacks and to continue the conversation. Thank you very much for coming.